Grocery prices went up again this year. Not a lot, all at once. Just a little, every month, in places most people don't check. USDA's own forecast puts food-at-home prices up around 3% for 2026. That number sounds small on paper. It doesn't feel small at the register. Here's what almost nobody explains clearly. It's not one thing pushing prices up. It's a stack of small things. Drought, a shrinking cattle herd, tariffs, a disease killing orange trees for 20 years straight, all landing on the same shopping cart at the same time. Some of these items are getting more expensive because there's simply less of them. Others are getting expensive for reasons that have nothing to do with supply at all. And a couple of them are actually getting cheaper right now, which is exactly why people miss the real story. They assume cheaper means problem solved, when the underlying issue hasn't gone anywhere. We're going to walk through 15 categories. Real data, real reporting. No guessing. Stick around, because number 8 on this list is the one most people have never even thought to worry about. And once you hear the number behind it, you won't look at your cart the same way. If you want more of these breakdowns before they hit the mainstream news cycle, go ahead and subscribe now. Let's get into it. Item number 1. Ground beef and steak. Start with the big one. Beef. This is the clearest supply story on the entire list. The US cattle herd is not shrinking a little. It's at the smallest size it has been in 75 years. USDA's January count put the national herd at 86.2 million head, and the beef cow herd specifically has dropped to a level not seen since 1961. That's not a marketing headline. That's a count of actual animals. Years of drought across the Great Plains forced ranchers to sell off breeding cows they couldn't afford to feed. You can't undo that overnight. A calf born this year doesn't become a steak for another 2 to 3 years, so even if every rancher in America decided to rebuild the herd today, prices stay tight well into 2027 and 2028. Retail choice beef prices rose about 27% from mid-2024 to mid-2026. Live cattle prices rose even faster, around 37%, which tells you the pressure is coming from the animal supply itself, not just retail markup. What this means for you: beef isn't coming back down soon. If you eat it regularly, this is the category where buying in bulk when it's on sale, splitting a larger cut with another household, or shifting a few meals a week toward pork or chicken actually makes a real difference in your grocery bill. This one is about protecting your weekly budget, not panicking over one trip to the store. Item number 2. Fresh vegetables. Vegetables don't usually get the headlines beef gets, but the number here is bigger than most people expect. USDA projected fresh vegetable prices to rise close to 4.8% in 2026, and pricing in the first part of the year was already running ahead of that pace. The driver is straightforward. Vegetables are perishable, they're heavy to ship, and they're extremely sensitive to weather. When a growing region gets hit with drought or an unexpected heat wave, there's no stockpile to fall back on the way there is with, say, canned goods or grain. Add rising transportation and labor costs on top of that, and a head of lettuce or a bag of peppers becomes one of the more volatile items in the entire store from week to week. Practical takeaway here: frozen vegetables are picked and flash frozen near peak season, so they don't carry the same weather-driven price swings that fresh produce does. Leaning on frozen for a portion of your vegetable intake, not all of it, just some of it, is one of the simplest ways to smooth out this particular price spike without losing nutrition. Item number 3. Sugar and sweets. This is one of the fastest moving categories in the entire USDA forecast. Sugar and sweets are projected to rise close to 6.7% in 2026, ahead of almost every other food-at-home category the agency tracks. Part of this ties back to global sugar production and weather in key growing regions. Part of it is simply that sweets and confectionery sit downstream of other rising input costs: packaging, transport, and in some cases cocoa, which we'll get to shortly. What to actually do here? This is a category where store brands versus name brands makes the biggest visible difference. because the markup on branded sweets tends to be higher than on branded staples like flour or rice. If sweets are a regular part of your shopping list, this is the aisle where switching to store brand saves the most, percentage-wise. Item number 4, non-alcoholic beverages. Soda, juice drinks, sports drinks, bottled tea. USDA's forecast puts this category up around 5.2% for 2026, one of the steeper increases on their list. This one is driven less by a single dramatic story and more by packaging costs, transportation, and the general upward drift of processed food inputs. It doesn't have the same one crisis, one headline story that beef or oranges have. It's just quietly compounding. Practical takeaway: buying in larger multi-packs when they're on promotion and treating flavoured drinks as an occasional purchase rather than a weekly staple is the most direct way to control spend in this category, since the per-unit price gap between bulk and single bottles has been widening. Item number 5. Processed fruits and vegetables. Canned tomatoes, frozen fruit blends, jarred vegetables. USDA flagged processed fruits and vegetables as one of the categories rising faster than the overall grocery average in 2026. The logic connects to the fresh produce story from item 2. If the raw crop costs more to grow and harvest, that cost eventually shows up in the canned and frozen aisle too, just with a delay, since processors often lock in supply contracts months ahead. What to do? This is a good category to watch for sales cycles rather than buying reactively. Canned and shelf-stable goods don't spoil, so stocking up modestly when a genuine sale hits, rather than paying full price the week you run out, has more impact here than in almost any other aisle in the store. Item number 6. Cereal and bakery. Products, bread, cereal, and baked goods made USDA's list of categories increasing faster than the 20-year average pace in 2026. Wheat and grain costs, packaging, and labour all factor in here, along with the same transportation pressure hitting most of this list. It's a slower burn than beef or citrus, but because bread and cereal are purchased so frequently, the cumulative effect on a monthly grocery bill is bigger than people usually notice. Practical takeaway: this is a category where a bakery's day-old section or a store's private label bread line often delivers the same product at a meaningfully lower price, since the premium on name-brand bread has widened relative to input costs. Item number 7. Fish and seafood. Seafood was also called out by USDA as one of the categories expected to rise faster than the overall grocery average in 2026. Seafood pricing is sensitive to fuel costs for fishing fleets, import tariffs on certain species, and, like beef, the time it takes for farmed seafood operations to scale up when demand rises. It doesn't get the same attention as beef, but the underlying cost pressure is similar. Supply that can't expand quickly, meeting demand that isn't shrinking. What to actually do? Frozen seafood, which is often flash frozen at the dock, tends to carry a smaller markup than the fresh counter, and the quality difference for most home cooking is minor. That's the most direct lever here. Item number 8. Orange juice. Here's the one most people never saw coming, and it's the one worth slowing down for. Florida used to produce around 200 million boxes of oranges a year. Today, it's under 20 million. That's a drop of roughly 90%, and it isn't from one bad season. It's from a bacterial disease called citrus greening that has been spreading through Florida's groves since 2005, with no known cure once a tree is infected. Brazil, the world's largest orange juice supplier, has the same disease working through its groves right now, along with recent flooding and drought that made for one of its worst harvests in 36 years. Here's the twist that makes this one genuinely confusing if you only skim headlines. Orange juice futures prices actually fell sharply in early 2026, down close to 30% year over year by some measures. That sounds like good news. It isn't the full picture. Prices easing doesn't mean the trees came back. It mostly reflects reduced demand, since consumption of orange juice has been declining for years as fewer people drink it regularly. The structural problem, a shrinking supply of actual oranges, hasn't been solved. It's just being masked by weaker demand for now. Practical takeaway. If orange juice is a household staple, this is a category where frozen concentrate, which stores well and isn't subject to the same daily price swings as the fresh squeezed or refrigerated cartons, is worth keeping a couple of containers of in the freezer. Not panic buying, just not being caught paying whatever the shelf says on a random Tuesday. Item number 9, coffee. This one is going to surprise people who've been avoiding the coffee aisle because of last year's headlines. Coffee prices spiked hard in 2025. Arabica rose more than 40% that year alone, driven by poor harvests in Brazil and Vietnam, plus tariffs on imports. But 2026 has actually brought relief. Brazil's crop forecast for the 2026 to 27 season is up more than 17% year over year thanks to better rainfall, and the US lifted tariffs on Brazilian coffee imports earlier this year. Arabica prices are projected to fall around 13 to 14% in 2026. The reason this belongs on an insider knowledge list isn't that coffee is scarce. It's the opposite. Most people are still bracing for coffee prices the way they were a year ago, and don't realize this is actually one of the few categories moving in their favor right now. Practical takeaway. This is a reasonable window to buy coffee at a normal or even improving price, rather than stockpiling out of fear. The bigger risk sitting in the background is weather. Heavy rain in Brazil could still trigger disease outbreaks that tighten the market again. So enjoy the dip, but don't assume it's permanent. Item number 10. Chocolate and cocoa tells a similar story to coffee, and it's just as underreported. Cocoa hit historic highs above $12,000 a metric ton at the end of 2024, driven by poor harvests in West Africa, which produces roughly 60% of the world's cocoa. By early 2026, prices had fallen below $8,000, and they kept easing through the first half of the year as weather improved in Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana, and new plantings in Ecuador matured. Analysts still expect cocoa to stay structurally more expensive than it was a few years ago. The era of extremely cheap chocolate isn't coming back, but the worst of the shortage-driven spike appears to be behind us for now. Practical takeaway. If you cut back on chocolate purchases during the price spike, this is a fair moment to ease back in, especially around sale periods, without expecting rock-bottom pre-2024 pricing to return. Item number 11. Eggs. Eggs are the flip side of the beef story, and it's worth understanding why, because a lot of people are still shopping like it's early 2025. Egg prices hit a historic high back then because of avian flu outbreaks wiping out laying flocks. USDA's 2026 forecast actually predicts a meaningful decline in egg prices this year, over 27% by some estimates, as flocks have been rebuilt and supply has stabilized. The catch? Avian flu hasn't been eliminated, just contained for now. It's a recurring seasonal risk, particularly in colder months when wild bird migration increases exposure risk to commercial flocks. One new outbreak at a major producer can spike prices regionally within weeks. Practical takeaway. Eggs are currently a good value relative to last year, so this is a fine time to lean on them as an affordable protein. Just don't be shocked if a regional price jump shows up again later in the year. That's the nature of a disease-driven market, not a sign anything you're doing wrong. Item number 12. Pork is the quiet alternative sitting one shelf over from beef, and it's worth pointing out directly. USDA's 2026 forecast has pork rising by less than 2% for the year, a fraction of the roughly 5.5% increase projected for beef and veal. That gap has been widening as the cattle shortage pushes beef prices up faster than almost any other protein category. Practical takeaway. If beef has become a stretch for your weekly budget, pork is currently one of the more stable, budget-friendly substitutions on the shelf, and it isn't tied to the same multi-year herd rebuilding timeline that's keeping beef elevated through 2027 and beyond. Item number 13. Rice doesn't usually make these lists, but it's been under real pressure. Rice production has been squeezed by droughts and floods in major growing regions, and export restrictions from large producing countries like India have added another layer of tightness to global supply. Because rice is a pantry staple with a long shelf life, price movement here often shows up gradually rather than in one dramatic spike, but it compounds the same way bread and cereal do. Practical takeaway: rice stores extremely well for a long time in a sealed, dry container, which makes it one of the few items on this list where buying a larger bag during a sale genuinely pays off, rather than being wasted risk. Item number 14. Butter and dairy. Here's a genuinely good news item, and it deserves a spot on the list precisely because it goes against the overall trend. USDA's 2026 outlook actually forecasts dairy products and fats and oils could decline in price this year, moving in the opposite direction from most other categories on this list. Egg supply recovery plays into this too, since eggs and dairy often get grouped together in household grocery planning, even though they come from very different supply chains. Practical takeaway: this is a category where you don't need a defensive strategy right now. If your grocery budget is stretched by beef, sugar, or produce, dairy and butter are a reasonable place to lean a little harder without much price risk in the near term. Item number 15. Restaurant meals and food away from home. Last one, and it's less about a specific product and more about a shift in where your money goes. USDA's forecast puts food away from home prices rising close to 3.7% in 2026. Faster than the roughly 2.5% projected for groceries bought at the store. That gap has been consistent for a couple of years now. Eating out is getting more expensive faster than cooking at home is. Restaurants are dealing with the same rising beef, produce, and labor costs as grocery stores. But they also carry higher fixed costs, rent, staffing, utilities, that get passed straight into menu prices with less room to absorb them. Practical takeaway: if your household eats out regularly, this is the single biggest lever for closing a strained grocery budget. Shifting even 1 or 2 meals a week from restaurant to home cooked, especially using some of the cheaper categories from this list like pork, dairy, or frozen vegetables, tends to save more than any individual product swap on the shelf. So here's the pattern once you step back from all 15. This isn't a story about shortages hitting everything at once. It's a story about a supply chain with almost no slack left in it. A cattle herd that takes years to rebuild. A citrus disease with no cure. Weather that swings harder than it used to. When one link in that chain gets squeezed, there's very little cushion left to absorb it, so the price shows up at your register within a season or two, not years later. The households that come out ahead here aren't the ones panic buying everything at once. They're the ones who know which categories are actually under long-term pressure. Beef, citrus, sugar, versus which ones are temporarily easing. Coffee, cocoa, eggs, and who shift their spending accordingly instead of reacting to whatever's in the headlines that week. Most people will notice these shifts only when they're standing at the register wondering why the total went up again. You don't have to be one of them. If this kind of breakdown is useful, subscribe so you catch the next one before it's common knowledge. Drop a comment with which item on this list surprised you most. I read everyone, and I'll see you in the next video.